All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the American Enterprise Institute. My name is Stan Veuger. I'm a senior fellow here at AI, and I'm delighted to host today's event on Seth Stephens-Davidowitz's new book, Who Makes the NBA? Data-driven answers to basketball's biggest questions. You can see the cover page there. Book is available on Amazon. Go ahead. Please order as many copies as you'd like. Good afternoon as well to our online viewership. For our online viewers, if you have questions, please submit them to beatrice.lee@ai.org or via Twitter with hashtag AskAIEcon. Anyway, I'm delighted to welcome back to AI my friend Seth Stephens-Davidowitz. As developments in the field of artificial intelligence continue apace, Seth, about a month ago now, launched his latest book project. It's an AI-fueled exploration of who makes it to the NBA, written in 30 days. The book is indeed written now. Congratulations, Seth. He'll give a short introduction just about the book, the actual substantive content, and then we'll talk a bit about how AI helped him write the book, analyze player data, generate illustrations, presumably including this one, and then decipher what separates NBA stars from the rest of humanity. Now, with that background, we're about to hear from Seth. After Seth's presentation, the two of us will have a conversation. We'll take some questions from you all and from our viewers online. Seth is an economist, also used to live across the street from me. He is also a New York Times bestselling author. His two previous books are Everybody Lies, for which we did a book event here at AEI, I believe in 2017. You can watch it online if you like. And Don't Trust Your Gut from 2022. He has worked as a data scientist at Google, a visiting lecturer at Wharton, and as a contributing op-ed editor for the New York Times. And BA in philosophy from Stanford and Harvard Econ PhD. Seth, welcome, and please take it away. You have a clicker here that you can use to manipulate these slides, and I look forward to hearing from
you. Thank you, Stan. So a few months ago, I started playing around with this tool. It was called Code Interpreter. It's now called Data Analysis from ChatGPT of OpenAI. How many people have heard of Code Interpreter or data analysis? Okay, so a few people. And it totally blew me away. So basically with Code Interpreter, you just type in and you talk to ChatGPT, and it'll manipulate data for you, kind of run Python code and do whatever you want. So you type, merge these data sets, and it merges the data set, clean the data set, make charts, make graphs, run these regressions. It does it all for you, it does all the coding, and produces all the charts, saves all the data sets, saves all the charts. And I'm just like, this is incredible. Things that used to take me 4 months were now taking me like 4 hours, literally. And I'm not the only one that said this. A lot of people, Ethan Malik from Wharton is obsessed with Code Interpreter. A lot of people are saying this is a revolutionary product. So I'm just like, wow, what does this mean for my creative process? So I've written 2 books, as Stan said, and each one took me about 3 years of full-time work. And because especially data analysis takes me forever. Merging the data set, cleaning the data set, analyzing and making the charts, it's all very time consuming. I do a lot of original research in my books. I'm like, if I can now do things that used to take me a few months and a few hours, I can write a book way quicker. And I tried to do a calculation how long I thought it would take. And I concluded I could write a good book in 30 days, which struck everybody as completely insane, but I kind of liked that because that was a challenge. Could I write a good book in 30 days of kind of intense work? So the book's done. It's available on Amazon, or it's called Who Makes the NBA? And I think it turned out better than I was expecting, I would say, and I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's definitely, up there with my previous books, even though it was done in, a 36th of the time. So the rest of the talk, I'm just going to be talking about the content from the book. But kind of behind the scenes, think about that every chart, every piece of art was created with AI, with either Code Interpreter, did all the analysis for me, create all the charts. All the art is from Midjourney or DALL-E. So that's kind of, and then with Stan, we're going to talk about AI and how that played out in the process. But for now, I'm just going to talk about the actual findings in the book. So first chapter in my book, No Court for Short Men. I think anybody who's a fan of the NBA, I'm obviously a big fan of the NBA. This is my Patrick Ewing jersey from the Knicks, my childhood hero. notes that height is an advantage in basketball. I mean, you kind of have to be blind to not notice that tall people are disproportionately NBA players. But you might not realize, I hadn't realized just how big an advantage it plays and how the relationship plays out. This is a chart, likelihood of American males of every height of reaching the NBA. And you see it's almost a perfect linear log relationship where each inch roughly doubles your chances of reaching the NBA. So if you're 5'11", you have twice the chance of making the NBA if you're 5'10", 6 feet, twice the chance of 5'11", kind of all the way out as far as we can measure, 7 foot, twice the chance of 6'11". And you do the math on this, it means that there are enormous differences in probability based on your height. If you're under 5'10", which is the average height of an American male, you have a 1 in 3.8 million chance of reaching the NBA on average. If you're 7 feet or over, a 7-footer, you have a 1 in 7 chance of reaching the NBA, which is a shockingly large chance. I don't think there's really any other comparable pursuit where one trait gives you such a big odd of reaching the very top of the pecking order. And what this means, there's kind of think about the math. Okay, if you have a 1 in 7 chance of reaching the NBA, I tweeted this out and a friend of mine pointed this out. He's like, wait, then we're not watching extraordinary athletes. Because think about it, like if you're 5'10" and you have a 1 in 200,000 chance of making the NBA, you have to be the best, like insanely good, 1 in 200,000. If you just have to be 1 in 7, that's not that remarkable. And one of the things you see in the data in the NBA is that taller people who make the NBA are just way worse athletes than shorter people because of this selection bias. So this is the relationship between height and vertical leap among NBA players, how high you get above the ground. And you can see a very, very sharp negative relationship that the taller you are, the less you can jump. And some people asked, is that kind of just due to biology in any case? But there's no study that has suggested any relationship between height and how far you should get off the ground. This is just, as far as we can tell, a selection bias that if you're tall enough to make the NBA, that's such an advantage that you don't have to be as good at anything else. This is the relationship between height and speed of NBA players, how quickly they run 3/4 of the court. And you can see that tall players are just much slower than short players. Again, no evidence in the general population that height should make you slower. And height and shooting, this is free throw percentage. Again, taller players are just way worse shooters on average. Not every tall player, but on average, way worse shooters than shorter NBA players. And I did another study on choking, who chokes in the NBA. So there's a good way to measure kind of a controlled experiment in NBA basketball, free throws. Every free throw is taken from the same place on the court, no defenders, kind of in exactly the same situation. And we can measure how good is someone at shooting free throws in average moments and pressure moments. So a pressure moment, the game is within 5 points and there are 5 minutes or less on the clock. This is just as fun as I was expecting when I was writing an MBA. I'm having the time of my life talking about basketball. This is a true passion project of mine, so thank you all for indulging my passion for NBA analysis. But who chokes? Basically, what you see among NBA players, and this is actually surprising, the average NBA player shoots 1 percentage point lower in pressure moments than non-pressure moments, and 1.5 percentage points lower in pressure moments in the playoffs, which is not true in a lot of other sports. In baseball, there's no difference on average in how people perform in pressure moments and non-pressure moments. But in basketball, the average player shoots 1 percentage point worse. But there are huge differences in tendency to choke. So this is a list of players who you see are exactly the same when there's no pressure and when it's a clutch moment. So the blue bar is their non-clutch percentage, and the red bar is their clutch percentage. And you see exactly the same, no difference. If there's a minute left on the clock and the game's tied, they shoot exactly the same as if the game's just starting and nobody's paying attention. But then there are some players, the moment proves too big. They just have way lower clutch percentage. You see the red bar for all these players, statistically significant, much lower than the blue bar. They are kind of chokers. They're not as able to handle this. So I'm like, what predicts this? And I spent a long time by the standards of this project trying to figure out why are some people chokers. And I tested all these theories. I got really excited, and none of them came true. One of my favorite theories was I thought your family background might affect your tendency to choke. So Jimmy Butler is famously really clutch. And Jimmy Butler had a really difficult childhood, underprivileged childhood. His father abandoned the family and his mother abandoned him later. It was just like crazy. And there's kind of a theory that Jimmy Butler has been through so much that he can handle anything, right? Like if you've been, if you've been through that, who cares that millions of people are watching you? That's nothing compared to the struggles he's been through. So I used, we can talk about later how I measured this, the family background of every player. And there's no correlation between difficulty of childhood and tendency to choke. I tested whether people get better in clutch shooting the more they do it. So that you could think if LeBron James has taken 1,000 clutch shots, like maybe that's the equivalent to just a normal shot to him at this point, but there's no relationship between how often you do it and clutch shooting. And then I was basically going to cut this chapter because I'm like, I can't figure out why some people choke until I found my favorite variable to explain the NBA, height. Height is a major predictor of choking, that taller people are much more likely to choke. The average 6-footer, no difference between clutch shooting and non-clutch shooting. The average 7-footer, 6.3 percentage points worse clutch shooting than non-clutch shooting. Why is that? Again, they don't have to be as good. So if you're 6 foot tall and you can't handle a pressure moment, one of the other millions of 6 feet tall people is going to just take your spot in the NBA. But because 7-footers are just competing against dozens of other people, a lot of them are kind of like I would be. They can't handle pressure, but it's kind of like, well, you're still tall, so here, take your job in the NBA. So on average, tall NBA players are way worse on everything we can measure. They're slower. They have lower vertical leap. They bench press less. This was surprising. I thought they'd be stronger. They bench press less, higher body fat, worse shooting in general. And then even starting with worse shooting, their shooting percentage goes down in clutch moments. So this was the most fun I had in the entire project. As a shorter man, 5'9" on a good day, I create a new metric. I call it Muggsies, and which stands for Metric for Understanding Game Given Sporting Individuals' Effectiveness and Size. And it is based, which ChatGPT actually came up with. I just said, like, give me something that Muggsies stands for, and it came up with that, which I thought was pretty good. So Muggsies can be thought of, and the math on this is really cool. The standard deviations above the mean someone is in basketball ability except their height. So this kind of really saves short men like me and really can reevaluate them. How good are they on everything except their height? And you see that Muggsy Bogues is number 1 on the list, 5.77 standard deviations above the mean in non-height basketball ability. Muggsy Bogues was 5'3" and a starting point guard in basketball for 14 years, which is just an insane accomplishment. Like, we should not... this kind of bothers me. Everyone's obsessed with Michael Jordan, who still comes up with number 9, which is still pretty good. But Michael Jordan is supposed to teach us the lessons of being good at your craft, mastering your craft, determination. I think Muggsy is the more impressive performer. To be in the NBA for 14 seasons at 5'3" is just such an insane accomplishment. But a lot of people don't even know about Muggsy Bogues. This is the top 10. And then this is reevaluating the consensus 10 best players of all time. Their average height is 6'10". And when you reevaluate these players on Muggsy's metric, they don't look so good. So Michael Jordan is still the 9th best player, but LeBron James, who's 6'9", is only 395th. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's 7'2", is only 2,244 among NBA players in non-height basketball ability. So they have such an advantage, as you see from the graphs, because they're enormous men, that they're really not, in the rest of their skills, necessarily the best players. And then I want to talk about the basketball genes as well. So this is a piece of DNA playing basketball. One of the cool things, we'll get to this in discussion, is I have zero artistic talent. I've never had any art in my book. But because of AI, I can just be like, I want to talk about genetics. I want a piece of DNA dribbling a basketball between its legs. And we get this, which is pretty good, I think. Maybe the hand should be a little bit higher, but this was created with DALL-E. So one of the striking facts about the NBA is the enormous prevalence of identical twins. There have been 11 pairs of twins in the NBA, and 9 of them were confirmed identical. One of them, I reached out to one of the guys on LinkedIn, and he said he had a DNA test, and they are identical as well. That's Charles Thomas. So 10 are identical, and the 11th, there's uncertainty whether Joey and Stephen Graham are identical. So this is just enormous prevalence of identical twins in the NBA. We can compare the percent of same-sex siblings who are identical twins across different sports, and you see that it's way higher in the NBA than a lot of other sports, a lot of Olympic sports, baseball, basketball, football, baseball. And why is this? Well, it's a dead giveaway for just how much genetics plays a role in basketball success. That identical twins, unlike the average brother who shares 50% of their DNA, the average identical twin shares 100% of their DNA. So if one person gets a good draw of DNA, the other twin is going to get that same good draw. And if DNA really matters, they're both going to make the NBA. And I've calculated that probably an identical twin of a player has more than a 50% chance of reaching the NBA himself, just because genetics are so important. I actually built a model of how much nature, nurture, and other factors play into how much one's basketball ability chances of reaching the NBA and other sports. And I calculate that basketball ability is more than 80% genetic, basically much higher than baseball or football. And that's all from using the identical twins relative to other family members that are in the NBA. So just genetics are hugely important in reaching basketball. A big part of that is because height is about 80% genetic, although other traits are also very genetic: hand size, arm length, vertical leap, and other factors as well. All right, like father, like son. So in the NBA, the average person, the average chance of an American individual making the NBA is 1 in 32,000. The average chance of a son of an NBA player is 1 in 43. This means that the son of an NBA player has a 744 times higher chance of reaching the NBA than an average individual, which seems like an enormous advantage, except I calculated that in a whole bunch of fields, and it's actually a lot higher in other fields, starting with president, where you have a 1.4 million higher chance of becoming president. Of course, it's only driven by 2 people, Adams and Bush. Billionaire, reality TV star, senator, army general, Pulitzer Prize winner, Grammy Award winner, Academy Award winner, all higher than NBA players. And I think part of that is because, say what you will about the NBA and other sports, they're true meritocracies. So if you're not good, you can't get a spot in the NBA. And Patrick Ewing is my favorite player growing up. Patrick Ewing Jr. got a tryout from his dad's team, the New York Knicks, and they cut him because he wasn't good enough. So it really is a meritocracy. It's only how good you are, whereas some of these other fields, parents can kind of give their kids non-meritocratic advantages. But the NBA is still higher than other sports. A major reason that the NBA is higher than other sports is because of genetics, which we talked about earlier. But another major reason, but there are other things, coaching, for example. So I looked at how do sons of NBA players differ from other NBA players? So you have every NBA player who didn't have a father in the NBA, and you have every NBA player who did have a father in the NBA. And I found on just about every metric, they're exactly the same. So average height, exactly the same. Average weight, exactly the same. Their stats were generally very similar. But there was one way they stood out. They're really good free throw shooters. So they shoot free throw percentage 5 percentage points higher, which is a big advantage in the NBA. And 8% of the top 50 free throw shooters of all time are sons of NBA players, compared to 2% in the general population. And I think the reason for this is they got coaching on shooting form from a very young age, and that can be a huge advantage. So Devin Booker is one of the greatest free throw shooters of all time, and his father is quoted as saying he always shot with perfect form. I insisted on it. So you can imagine that's kind of an advantage. If you have a father who played in the NBA, who learned from the best coaches over many years, then starting at the age of 3, 4, 5, very young age, you're going to be mastering your form on shooting and practicing over and over at this. And you see that sons of NBA players are great, great shooters. I have a section on the basketball talent around the world, which I call Missing LeBrons. And I kind of have a theory that the best basketball player in the world is probably working right now as a rice farmer in India. I mean, not necessarily, but when you think about it, around the world, there's so many more people than in the United States. It's kind of a remarkable coincidence if the best potential basketball player happened to be born in the United States, the place where the NBA exists and the place where NBA was invented. Around the world, the game has become much more international. When I first started following basketball in 1990, only about 7% of players came from countries other than the United States. Now it's more than 20%. And it turns out that there are some countries now that as a percentage of birth actually produce more players than the United States. So US Virgin Islands, Montenegro, Bahamas all produce NBA players at a higher per birth rate than the United States does. But still, there are only 3 regions of the world that produce NBA players of the same order of magnitude as the United States. That's the Caribbean, the Baltic states, Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia, and the former Yugoslavia. Basically 3 regions of the world to produce NBA players, plus the United States, produce NBA players much more than other countries. And you can see that many countries are producing very, very few NBA players, a much lower rate than the United States for sure. In fact, you can do a little thought experiment. I think some of the art got a little messed up on this, but if the NBA right now represented the demographics of the world, today there would be 79 players from China, 78 from India, 15 from Indonesia, 14 from Pakistan, 9 from Bangladesh, 7 from Mexico, 6 from the Philippines, 6 from Egypt, 6 from Ethiopia, and 5 from Vietnam. Instead, today, there are 0 players from all these countries. So just these countries do not produce NBA talent. Why is that? Well, we talked earlier that each inch doubles your chances of reaching the NBA, and the average 7-footer has a 1 in 7 chance of making the NBA. We know that average height differs enormously in different parts of the world. So not surprisingly, average height of a country is a huge predictor of how much NBA talent they produce. You see that countries where the average male adult height is 5'6" or lower produce virtually no NBA players. That's places like India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Philippines. There's been only 1 player from a country with the average male height 5'6" or under. That's Hashim Thabit from Tanzania, where the average male height is 5'5" and a half. And if you love facts like this, you're going to really enjoy my book. It is filled with useless facts like that. Which are truly thrilling for me. But, and his dad was educated at Oxford. He's an architect, and he grew up in kind of a rich enclave of Tanzania. So that's kind of and he grew up to be 7'3" tall. But nobody else from a country with average male height of 5'6" or below has reached the NBA. And you can see 5'6" to 5'8", we start getting some players, 5'8" to 5'10", we start getting some players. But then once you get to 5'10" or above, when you're talking about a country like Germany, United Kingdom, Ukraine, Serbia, which isn't on this chart, you really start seeing an explosion of NBA talent. One of the things about the globalization of basketball is we're really good right now at finding 7-footers around the world and turning them into NBA players. So more than half of 7-footers in the NBA right now come from outside the United States. So if you're 7 foot tall, and you live in Cameroon or Netherlands or Serbia, kind of wherever you live, we're really good. Maybe you'll be a gym coach or a high school teacher or someone on the street is going to spot you and say, have you thought of playing basketball? And it turns out a large percent of 7-footers in the NBA, including Hall of Fame 7-footers, didn't even play basketball until they were like 13 or 14 years old. And people are just like, here, try this, and they became Hall of Famers. We're really good. It's your potential talent, your potential advantage in basketball is so obvious that we kind of spot this talent around the world. But if you look at shorter NBA talent, we're much worse at getting shorter NBA talent from the rest of the world. And the percentage that comes from foreign countries gets lower and lower as the height gets smaller and smaller. We're not really finding the talent around the world. In fact, the only way we really find short, I should put short in parentheses because short means 6'5" or below. So a lot of these men are not short by conventional measures, but they are short by NBA standards. And the only way we really find short NBA talent, not surprisingly, is if you live in an area where basketball is really popular. So that's why former Yugoslavia and the Baltic states produce a lot of NBA players, including shorter NBA players, because basketball is popular there. If basketball is not popular in your country, you basically have no chance of becoming a player unless you grow to be 7 foot tall and everyone's like, your basketball talent is so obvious. So we're just never going to find your potential talent in places with low interest. And more fun facts, a lot of the low interest places are just people who are born in the United Kingdom and moved to the United States when they were infants, like Ben Gordon fits in that category. And then there are a couple exceptions, and it's basically just explained by random things. Pretty much everybody who came from a low-interest part of the world and became a basketball player, they lived in an enormous city without an exception, and that city just happened to have some basketball league. So there's one player, I can't remember his name because he barely made in the NBA. The only player from Denmark was 6'2", and he played Denmark. Some part of Copenhagen became obsessed with 3-on-3 basketball, and he was living in that region, and he started playing 3x3 basketball and became a mediocre NBA player. The final factor that predicts things, this chart's a little bit hard to follow, but I'll talk you through it, is this kind of surprised me a little bit, though it's obvious once you say it, is popularity of volleyball, a negative predictor of NBA talent. And why is that? What other sport needs enormous men? There's only one other sport, volleyball, that can use someone who's 6'9", 6'10". In fact, if you look at the average body type of different sports, the average volleyball player around the world, professional volleyball player, has about the exact same body type as the average small forward in the NBA. So countries, and there are many countries where volleyball is far more popular than basketball. Volleyball is 5 times more popular than basketball in Iran. It's more popular than basketball in Brazil and Puerto Rico and Bulgaria and Russia. And these countries tend to have fewer NBA players than you expect, and particularly fewer NBA forwards. Because the 6'9" and 6'10" athletes in these countries, instead of playing basketball, they play volleyball, which is a terrible financial decision, by the way, because the best volleyball players in the world make like 300,000 euros, and the worst NBA players make like $1 million a year. So I feel sorry for the Bulgarian volleyball stars. If they just lived in the United States, they'd be basketball stars almost certainly. Finally, I want to talk about the socioeconomics of NBA players. And for a while, there was an idea that it was an advantage to have a rougher background as far as making the NBA, to be underprivileged. There are a lot of famous people who came from underprivileged backgrounds. LeBron James, the best player of the last 30 years, maybe the best player of all time, was born to a single mother in poverty in Akron, Ohio. And there are a lot of players like this, and people came up with this hypothesis that these people are so driven to get out of their situation that they will practice basketball day and night. Whereas if you came from an easier background, you're not going to be as driven and you're not going to compete. It was kind of a famous theory. There are all kinds of quotes espousing this theory. This has never been close to being true. So I've looked at this, some other scholars have looked at this, and any dimension we can measure, NBA players are much more likely to come from privileged backgrounds, all else equal. So this is zip code of birth. And what you can see is in richest zip codes, both among African Americans and Caucasians, the richer zip codes produce 1.5 to 3 times more NBA players per birth than the poorest zip codes in the United States. We can also see among African Americans, population writ large, NBA players compared to the black population more generally, far more likely to be born to unmarried mothers, far less likely to be born to teenage mothers. So just on every dimension, we can see NBA players are more likely to come from richer zip codes, higher socioeconomics, 2-parent homes, non-teenage mothers. My favorite clue on the demographics of NBA players, there's a great study, I don't know if you know it, in Quarterly Journal of Economics from Roland Fryer and Steve Levitt. They studied the first names of African Americans in the 1970s and 1980s, and they found that a first name is a giveaway of one's socioeconomics in the black community. About 13% of African Americans in the time period they looked at had unique names. They're names that weren't given to anybody else in that year. So LeBron actually be an example. When he was born, nobody else in that year in the United States was given the name LeBron. It was a new, unique name. And it turns out that unique names are much more likely to be given to African Americans from poorer backgrounds or parents with lower levels of education, a big predictor. In some of the poorest neighborhoods, about 20% of African American kids have unique names. I studied the NBA. In the NBA, there are only 7% of players have unique names, much lower than the population at large, let alone the population in the poorest communities. Why is this? Again, socioeconomics. NBA players are coming from richer backgrounds, more privileged backgrounds. That's why so many of them are named things like Chris, the most popular name, Mike, Marcus, James, disproportionately given names like that, a dead giveaway. If you listen to the game and you just listen to the first names, you'll know that the socioeconomics of NBA players. So I've kind of said, for every LeBron James, I've done the math, for every LeBron James who was born to a single 16-year-old mother in Akron, Ohio, the inner city, there's been a Michael Jordan born to a middle-class two-parent family in Brooklyn, and a Chris Paul, a second-born child to a middle-class family in North Carolina who joined Mr. Paul on an episode of Family Feud. So very different, disproportionately, that's the demographics that NBA players are coming from. And there's a lot more in the book. Actually, I think it's probably best to move to Q&A. I have some more, but we can talk about it during the Q&A process. So let's move to Q&A now, but that's basically the content of the book. And again, a lot of what I also talk about in the book is how I used AI to do this pretty quick. I mean, this has been 30 days of work. And there are a lot more sections on coaches and the draft and all kinds of other topics about NBA basketball, all data analysis. So thanks so much for attending. Thank you, Stan, for having me. And now I'll take some questions.
Thank you so much, Seth. So I want to, as you said, switch gears a little bit and talk about the process as opposed to the substance, which of course is what you actually want to talk about. So first question I want to ask you, and this, just assume that people have no idea what AI software exists and how you could use it for a project like this. Can you talk a bit about your setup? What software did you use? How do different applications interact with one another? Can you talk about that just a little bit from scratch?
Yeah. So the number one tool for this book. So one of the things when I said I'm writing a book in 30 days with AI, everyone just assumed I was going to put in ChatGPT and say like write this book, and then everyone's like, doesn't ChatGPT just make things up? I think people were a little not impressed with that idea. All the writing pretty much was mine. There was one section on how to use AI where I'm like, I don't really care that much how good the writing is, so I just let ChatGPT write that section. I gave him the content, I gave an outline, I'm like, flesh this out. But generally, I found that ChatGPT is a B writer, and I would like to think I'm at least a B+ writer, A- writer. If you're writing a book and you want it really good writing, you can't just let ChatGPT write it for you. So the big tool was data analysis, which is part of ChatGPT+. I have no affiliation with OpenAI. I'm not advertising for them, but it is a really useful product. And it's GPT+. And you basically...
You'd like for them to give it to you for free.
Yeah, that would be nice. The way to learn to use it is just practice with it. So the first couple months before I started the project, I was just playing around with it. And basically you upload CSV files to it, and then you just talk to it and you ask it to do things, and it runs all the code and then creates the output.
CSV files are spreadsheets, basically.
Spreadsheets, yeah. And then the other thing is the art, which was either DALL-E or Midjourney. And I found the key to that is just quantity leads to quality. So you saw that picture of LeBron James working as a rice farmer in India. That was after about 200 attempts to create a picture of LeBron James working as a rice farmer in India. And you kind of just have to keep trying until you get your best version. And even so, I haven't found a way to avoid having one problem. So, one of my pictures, the guy has 6 fingers. And I'm just like, but it was the best by far of 200 options. And I'm like, I can't do another 200 to get 5 fingers. So the version of AI we have now, you sometimes have to have 6 fingers and things like that. But the amazing thing is it can just turn.
And that's exactly the problem that you have when you try to have it generate text, right? That because it's a predictive algorithm, there's just some error margin. And so sometimes it's going to get the number of fingers wrong because it's just, predicting what's the next piece of hand shape, right? And so that's why you
exactly. I don't know.
Use the text
you'd think it would be able to predict that most people have 5. If anything, you think the opposite would have a harder time drawing like the rare person
well,
with
but
6
it does
fingers.
Incremental prediction, right? It doesn't do that.
I guess. I think nobody really knows exactly what's leading to some of these problems. The AI is kind of a pretty big black box as far as people understanding.
But so, just to emphasize, so you basically for the actual writing, that's not where you save time. It's really on the data analysis side and the image generation.
Data analysis, you save time, and then the image generation, you do things that you just never could have otherwise done. I mean, I have zero artistic talent. You asked me to draw a horse, I could not make anything that is in the ballpark of a horse. So I've never even considered having art in any of my works, but now I can just say, have a piece of DNA dribbling between its legs, and it'll do that.
In the book, you really see the types of art that you can use AI for, right? Because you use it for really sort of traditional illustrations, right? The guy playing basketball in front of a suburban house. You cannot really use it for the charts, right? And so this is the only negative thing I'm going to say about the book. But you can definitely see the charts maybe reflect your sense of aesthetics more than the actual illustrations. And so one thing I was wondering about, can you not just, I guess you can't feed the chart into ChatGPT Plus and then tell it to spruce it up a little bit?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get there. So one of the things, I have a whole section on how I use AI, and I offer the important caveat that it's, as of today. And in 3 months, it may be totally different. In 3 months, you may never have the 6-finger problem, or you may be able to just spruce up a chart. I mean, ChatGPT has been available for a year and like 3 days. So it's insane how fast this is moving. So we don't know what capabilities it's gonna have. This book was created with the worst version of AI we're ever gonna have. And it's presumably its abilities are growing exponentially. So it's hard. I would never bet against its capabilities.
And there are just capabilities that just aren't included, period, right? Like you can have, like PowerPoint now has an AI side that basically you tell it, why don't you make these slides a little nicer, right? And clearly that's not been incorporated here yet, but it's definitely possible.
My aesthetic sense is so bad that I always think I have nice slides, and everyone makes fun of them.
But good. So setting writing aside, the biggest time savings, when you do data analysis work, where did it come from? It's really just writing the code. Is that
Yeah, it writes the code, but that's such a huge.
No, of course.
I mean, I don't even know how to use Python.
Yeah.
I mean, I know like enough about coding, and it's similar to other languages that I can check the work, but I never learned Python, and it just does that. And I also.
And so in generating code, just to be clear, it doesn't make the same kind of mistakes that it would in text?
Not really. You always have to double check it.
Or is everything you just showed us wrong?
You have to everything was double checked. It's the same if you work with an RA or an intern. I mean, if they come back, you say, look at the relationship between height and vertical leap. You'd want to double check their work and be like, did you do the merge correctly? Do you have all the right players? Are the number of observations the same as they were before you did the merge? And every time I do an analysis, I both check the code and then I do a number of checks on the final output to make sure it makes sense. And I'm sure there are a couple errors in the book, but I don't think any more errors than if I wasn't using AI.
I see. And so the AI application it really stands apart from the other pieces of software, right? These things aren't integrated yet. It's not, you tell it, write this Python code for me, and then it exports it.
No, it does.
It does. Okay.
No, it exports the chart, it exports the data set, it does everything. So it's not like, that's another thing. It's not like you just tell it, write the code for me, and then you run the code, which would be annoying. It just runs the code.
Especially if you don't know how to.
Yeah, it just runs the code, and it's just, your chart is done. It shows you the chart, it shows you the new data set. It's all done internally. It's wild. Now, there is a caveat. So you might say, why did I focus on the NBA? Well, obviously, as seen by my outfit, I'm a pretty big NBA fan, so it's kind of a natural area. I'm pretty passionate about basketball. But it's also just useful for some subtle reasons having to do with the capabilities of AI. AI, it will not run the code internally if a data set is too large. Right now, the version of AI that may change in a couple months, and too large just means like 10,000 observations. So because there have only been 4,900 NBA players in history, all the data sets are pretty small. So it would be much harder to have written this book analyzing daily stock market data or something, or minute-to-minute stock market data.
Or baseball.
Or even baseball, which has larger data sets.
The one sport where the statistics are more exciting than the sport itself.
So it's very, I think that, I'm sure the memory capabilities are going to improve over time, but right now they're limited. So the fact that basketball, the data sets are small, was really useful for this project. And then the other thing that's great about basketball is just there's so much data available. So all these data sets combine performance, performance of players, where players come from. It's all readily available in ways that it wouldn't be if I was studying something that is of less interest to so many nerds.
And so how does the data collection process work? It's just you collect the data and you feed it into the AI, or is that integrated too? Can you have it scrape data for you?
It can't directly scrape data, but you can save a website as an HTML, which this saved me hundreds of hours. I just save a website as an HTML, and then you upload that HTML site, and then it'll find the table in there and create that as a CSV or data set. So that was like a huge time saver. I found out about that capability, some video on YouTube, and it was like in the middle of my project, and it just saved a ton of time.
Yeah, good. Because they're something that doesn't always work that well yet is when you ask, when you just ask factual questions, certainly about current affairs, right? That's often.
Yeah, although I think some people don't realize a lot of the hallucination was from an earlier version of AI, GPT 3.5. There's been a big improvement from 3.5 to 4.0. That it hallucinates a lot less. It still does hallucinate sometimes, but it's not as laughably bad in hallucinations. So even that problem kind of becomes diminished over time, and definitely is if you use GPT 4.0. Again, I have no affiliation with OpenAI. I'm not advertising their product, but I do objectively think it's an amazing product. Just using GPT 4.0, which is only available with ChatGPT Plus, lowers the hallucination problem a lot.
So how far away? And that's obviously a big concern people had. How far away do you think we are from the situation where you can actually just tell it, why don't you write a book about football by Seth Stephens-Davidowitz?
I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows.
I see.
So my understanding, I have a lot of friends that work at OpenAI, are pretty close to this process, and my understanding is nobody understands when the capabilities are going to come, and they just come. So I think GPT itself blew everybody away. ChatGPT, the capabilities shocked them. It recently started doing algebra much better than it had done, and nobody knew that was coming at any point. So I have no idea. I don't think anybody knows how many years away we are from any of this stuff, but this is where we are right now, is kind of able to write a book in 30 days.
Do you think this genre, sort of pretty data analysis heavy, is where the biggest savings are? Or do you think if you just wanted to have a pretty mediocre romance novel, do you think it would do an okay job?
My understanding is the two areas where AI are blowing people away the most are coding and art. So coding, it doesn't just have to be to write a book, just helping people write their code, but debug their code, writing a website, that's a huge advantage. And then art is another one. As I'm playing around on Midjourney. I don't know if people have used Midjourney, but Midjourney, you just type in something like, make a picture of LeBron James working as a rice farmer, and it'll do that. And you actually see all the other pictures people are asking for at the same time on the Midjourney Discord. And it's really cool. So many people are writing like AI coloring books, and it's like wild just how good they are. They're just like AI is amazing. There's really no need necessarily for a human-made coloring book at this point. If you just say, make me a coloring book with different animals, horse, elephant, AI is just amazing at that. One thing I definitely was criticized for, I've been tweeting about this process a lot, and some people have hammered me, you're putting artists out of work. Because there have been artists whose job was to draw a picture of a piece of DNA dribbling between its legs, or LeBron James working as a rice farmer in India, or all these other pieces of art I have. And I kind of say that I'm not really, because I've never had art in my book, so I'm not really replacing any human artist that I use, but I do agree this is an interesting question, and how do we want to deal with it as society? AI has kind of blown everyone away. If you asked where automation was more likely to have an effect 20 years ago, someone cleaning dishes or someone creating great art, I think most people would have bet the dishwashers were in trouble and the artists were safe. And it's been completely reversed, where the more creative you are almost, the more at risk you seem to be from AI tools. And the more you're doing manual labor, that's where AI has really struggled. You can't get you can't get a robot right now to load or unload your dishwasher. but you can get it to create art that is as good as some of the art from the greatest artists in human history.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that was not people's expectation. Well, people were just extrapolating from the prior trends, I guess.
Yeah.
People were definitely forecasting we'd have self-driving cars by now, which, as someone who doesn't know how to drive, would have
You don't know how to drive?
Not really. Would have been.
Is that
nice.
in Netherlands?
Well, you know.
Bike?
Yeah, we're focused on volleyball and basketball. I'm going to open it up to the room. I also have a few questions from our online audience. I'm going to ask one of the online questions, and then we're going to go over here. For people in the room, please wait for the mic to arrive, then introduce yourself, ask a question. But let's first do a question here that ties in nicely with what you were just talking about. Do you have any concerns that the lower cost of writing a book using AI will incentivize more bad seeds to proliferate their work?
And am I in the category of bad seeds?
You don't have to answer that second part.
I hadn't thought about that. I mean, there are a lot of bad books without AI. So that's always been, but is that even an issue? It depends what the purpose of art is, right? So I think a lot of people would argue, I mean, the median readership for a book, I think, is pretty close to zero, right? 0 copies. Similar to median readership of an academic article.
Sites, yeah.
Median sites.
Or 90th percentile sites, probably.
90th percentile sites. So, the question is, what's the purpose of creating art? I think a lot of people would say it's an end of itself. And if you, definitely in this process, it felt like I had a tool to unleash my creativity in ways that I've never had before, particularly with the art. But that was just like so cool to me because I do feel like there's a creative artist somewhere inside me, but the fact that you can't draw a horse like kills that creative artist, that Van Gogh inside me. Like the ideas are always percolating like, whoa, that would be cool.
It's a bit like how the basketball player inside you was killed by the lack of height.
Yeah, now we just need like leg extensions, AI to create leg extensions or something. And then, because that's another one. I've always had, if people know basketball, like a great hook shot. That's always been my specialty, but a hook shot is really only useful if you're 7 feet tall. So it was only useful I was playing against like friends who were shorter than I am. There wasn't really much use, but so the fact that it can enhance your creativity and allow you to express your creativity, I think can be a great thing, which maybe is more the purpose of art than getting other people to read it, since it's very rare that anybody's going to read your art or consume your art anyway.
I see. That's a good answer. Let's go over here.
Richard Coleman. I went to the University of North Carolina, where the football season is defined as the period of time you had to wait until basketball started. A couple of observations. You're sort of picking on the big guys, but of course the big guys are on the court because they rebound. So one of my questions is, how do you assess the value in that contribution when you're rating people? As the moderators observe, baseball is all about statistics, and they have value above replacement, and all that kind of stuff. Do you see something coming up where there will be a core number that general managers can use to evaluate talent, and where guards and what used to be called centers are all competing in a universal statistic? Also, what are you going to do with Wembanyama? 19-year-old, 7'6".
7'3", I think, but wingspan.
I think his height's pretty close up there too.
So one thing to clarify, I'm just saying that taller players have to be worse at everything else because height is such an advantage. That doesn't mean that they're not really useful to the team. It's just their use comes a lot more from their height, that all else, they can jump less high, they shoot worse, they're less good clutch shooters. If I was coaching a team, I would not be like, I want my team to have all 6-foot players, because obviously rebounding is important, block shots are very important and everything. So I'm not saying they're worse players, just on a height adjusted basis. And I didn't get in this book into the debate about what's the best statistic to measure players. There are all kinds of different statistics. There's win shares per 48. Win shares, there's value above replacement players. The NBA, it's been proven a lot more difficult to measure the value of a player than it has been in baseball because it's such a team game and so many things you do are just so difficult to measure. So if someone's really good at setting screens or someone's really good at making a pass that leads to another good pass. All of that is so hard to measure in ways that aren't true in some other sports.
It's why data analytics in soccer is even worse.
Yeah, soccer is another problem. Although my understanding is that's an area where AI is actually may allow for improvement. That AI may allow for us to measure the value of players in these very complicated team games where some of the things people are doing are so subtle and hard to pick up in traditional measures. So that'll be very interesting. I could imagine a big improvement that comes from that.
Wembanyama?
Oh yeah, he's an amazing player. I think it is interesting. I didn't get into this, but if you just look at the data on players in all sports who are recognized as once-in-a-generation talent, their chances of being Hall of Famers are like above 50%. So LeBron James was recognized as a once-in-a-lifetime, a once-in-a-generation talent. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in basketball. It's across all sports as well. Bryce Harper in baseball, and they're just all the hockey player Crosby. I forget his name, but I'm not a hockey fan. But when you definitely recognize when these players, everyone says this guy's gonna be amazing. They are universally amazing. One thing I did not look into is the effects of height on injuries. Some people say that tall players are at risk of their legs having leg problems, which is really the only thing that I think could derail a Wembanyama at this point is if he has a leg injury. But I didn't look at whether that's true or not. I mean, if you might want me, my prediction is Wembanyama will be a Hall of Fame player with a greater than 50% chance.
There's a related to the injury, to your injury comment. There's a question, again related to Wembanyama in particular, where the person asks, "Do you think the mechanics of shooting are just more difficult for people with longer limbs, or the effect of growth spurts?" They're saying, for instance, Giannis' shooting declined after his rookie year because he grew 3 inches, while Wembanyama credits his good shooting to having been extraordinarily tall forever and not having gone through major growth spurts. Is that? There's no way you have detailed enough data on people's.
No, but there is a theory
that,
among NBA players. I actually talk about this in the book. So one of the so we know that height it's long been known is really important for how good you are in basketball. Now, a bunch of years ago, people realized it wasn't actually height that matters. NBA fans will know what's coming. It's wingspan, how high you reach. So you don't really care for a basketball player height, how high your head goes. You care how high your arms go if you're trying to rebound or block a shot. And a lot of NBA players, Elton Brand was 6'8", but he had such a big wingspan. He was as effectively as tall as any other center, and that's why he could play the center position. So wingspan is really more important than height. Another thing that's really important in basketball that isn't talked about as much, hand size, your ability to palm a ball. Phil Jackson was once asked, who's coached, one of the great coaches of all time, coached both Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, which one would you pick on your team if you could pick only one of them? He said Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan had big hands and Kobe Bryant had small hands. Ability to palm a basketball, very, very useful to just grab a ball. Michael Jordan had huge hands. Kyrie Leonard, enormous hands. A lot of other, Wembanyama has big hands. Giannis, huge hands. And actually, I did a study where what players outperform their draft pick, do better than you predict they would. The biggest predictor of inefficiency I could find was hand size. People just are not taking into account. Players with small hands are just terrible NBA players, and they still get drafted high. It's really unbelievable.
You're going to have to make a ranking of skill conditional on both height and hand size.
Yeah, and I don't know if Muggsy Bogues secretly had good hands, but wait, there was something, I think I forgot where I was going.
It was about the growth spurts and the.
Oh, so then there's a theory that hand size makes you a worse free throw shooter. Just because it's like a shooting motion, not palming the ball is actually useful for directing a ball, whereas if you palm it, it's a little hard to direct it in the same way. And I tested that in the data. It is a negative predictor, but height is still a big negative predictor in the way I show controlling for hand size. So there are some effects of one's body that could affect some of the height effects. But I think so much of what it just has to be by definition. If height is such an advantage, it's kind of like attractiveness in acting in movies. The less attractive actors are going to be better actors on average.
That's right.
Because you just have to be to make, because you're overcoming such a disadvantage.
Let's go to Phil Wallach and then here in front there.
Two questions, a substantive and a process. The substantive is, you talked about having this hard Scrabble background variable. Did that predict anything at all?
Yeah. Also the background variable, this is an interesting use of ChatGPT, and some people might disagree with this. There's no objective measure of the background of every NBA player. But ChatGPT knows so much about every NBA player, including their backgrounds, whether some NBA players survived wars, in the country of their birth. Some NBA players had single parents, death of a father, death of a mother. So I actually asked ChatGPT, rank the difficulty of players' backgrounds, and the rankings were so sensible. It's like the equivalent of asking someone on Mechanical Turk, rank all the backgrounds, and it was extremely sensible. And the one thing it predicted, it was an enormous effect, technical fouls per minute, tougher backgrounds, way higher rate of being called for technical fouls. And I think we know, I didn't really get into this in the book, but Jim Heckman's work has shown the value of a privileged background in building non-cognitive skills, social skills, trust, all these skills that are really, really important, that I think even among NBA players who overcame the odds, who came from an underprivileged background, they still are showing the disadvantages that come from disadvantage, basically. And not all. LeBron James commits technical fouls at a lower rate than the average NBA player. Kawhi Leonard, who had a really rough, difficult childhood in Compton, commits almost no technical fouls. But on average, and then there are some players who came from, sons of doctors and lawyers, Dirk Nowitzki, who just commits technical fouls like there's no tomorrow. So it's not a perfect relationship, but it is a highly significant relationship, about twice the rate from more difficult backgrounds, not just socioeconomics, just however you measure it. So someone happened to lose their father when they were a kid, or their father just randomly died, or their country went through war, or anything you look at, that does seem to show up in that measure.
That's really interesting. So the process question is whether you tried to use ChatGPT to help generate analytic insights of any kind. I mean, using it to create this index or ranking for that gets into an analytic capacity, but the kind of thing that you would delegate to a research assistant. Was there any sense in which you used it as a collaborator to help drive your own sort of hypothesis formation?
I tried and it never worked. So I kind of imagine I'm like, so I had this list of, this chart of, and it's based on data of per million births, how many NBA players come from every country. So I thought, what's really interesting? I could just feed this data into ChatGPT, and it has all this knowledge of every country, and basically it's neurons correlating things. So I'm like, tell me what the countries that produce a lot of NBA players have in common. And I'm like, it'll just come out and spit out something that I never would have thought of, and that would be awesome, and that would be really doing science. And it didn't work at all. So maybe a future version will, but I didn't have any luck in that process.
Let's go over here. Let's take two questions. Let's go first over here in front, and then
Hi. You said it took you 3 parts to the same question, 200 attempts to generate that image. And I presume you use Midjourney or DALL-E. Were those 200 attempts with different prompts, or were they just totally stochastic? You asked the same question and you got a different image. Just related to that comes you also mentioned that you used a code interpreter and not something like Copilot, for example. Now, 99% of software engineers, coders, are using Copilot for coding. And what is the difference really between code interpreter and Copilot? Lastly, related to the same question about hypothesis generation, there has been some work done, I think Sendil Mullainathan also has done, using machine learning to generate theory, for hypothesize. So I'm wondering if you did anything analogous to that.
Yeah. So the mid-journey prompts, a combination of changing the prompt and just refreshing, or mid-journey will also say, it'll give you 4 options, and you can, if you like one of them more than another, you can say, do it similar to that one, but make some changes. So it's kind of an iterative process that you just get better at over time and kind of build an instinct for. Copilot versus code interpreter, or now data analysis. My understanding of Copilot is it's much more useful if you know how to use the code and you're doing really complicated stuff, and it'll help you make corrections. And that just wasn't what I was doing. I was trying to make it do kind of basic statistical analysis in a language that I didn't know at all. And I think code interpreter is much better at that. And did you say it was Sendel Mullatinathan who did that work?
The last one.
Yeah.
I've forgotten whether it's his. I read 2 or 3 papers recently.
Yeah.
So some people have been doing work on using machine learning to actually do hypothesis generation. If I could just add to that, because it's also related to something on the image side, which is the copyright problem. I didn't want to.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not familiar with those papers. I'll check them out. I'm definitely a big fan of Mullatinathan's work, so I know he's been really in the AI stuff. He's always he was a professor of ours when we were at Harvard, and he was always 10 years ahead of everybody else. He was talking about machine learning when nobody was talking about machine learning, and then machine learning became a big thing. But the only attempt I had at hypothesis testing was what I told you about, and it didn't work. So I don't know. It may help down the road. It wasn't helping with this. I think the questions here are a little bit also obvious. More like if you're going to do a study of who makes the NBA, you're going to look at height. You're going to look at the countries people come from. You're going to look at socioeconomics. I don't think it was rocket science what questions I was going to focus my analysis on. Whereas a lot of times if you're doing an academic paper and you have to say something new, you really need to find something very, very subtle that's going to count as an original contribution, which may have more use for a machine learning model to give you ideas.
Thank you. Leon Peace. I went to a school where the license plate said, if God is not a Tar Heel, why is the sky Carolina blue? So in the spirit of Chapel Hill basketball, how do you account for implicit bias, or do you account for the implicit biases that AI is now known to also incorporate?
Yeah, it's a big complication. So again, I think the use of AI for coding, I don't think that plays a role. I don't think there are implicit biases, as far as I can tell, in its decision of whether, how to write the code, which is basically just doing things that I tell it to do. But implicit bias is a big issue. Especially this is a topic where I had to be a little careful because I'm a Caucasian male writing about a sport that's 80% African American, and I definitely was running into areas that could be politically charged, politically challenging, and there definitely are times where it'll show that the images that ChatGPT creates will have sexist biases, racist biases. The way that I deal with that is just if something seems to show a bias, don't use it, use a different image. But it's definitely something as a society we have to grapple with that chat, and definitely something that OpenAI has to grapple with. That what do you do with the fact that it does have all these biases just from its training data that can really be offensive to a lot of people.
One example of bias from training data, whenever I tell it to write poetry in Dutch, it'll use phrases from the Dutch national anthem. That's basically all it has. It's pretty weak. Let's go over here in the middle. Sorry.
In terms of the zip code.
Sorry, please can you hold for the mic? Sorry.
My name is Robert Clayton. I run the Sports Analytics Club program, which is a nonprofit teaching young people data science education through sports data-driven research projects. And one of the projects that we're looking at is Muggsy Bogues to Naismith based upon AI.
Wait, say that again?
Muggsy Bogues to Naismith based upon an AI research-driven project. One of the complications that I think I'm experiencing is how you go about evaluating the value to a team of a player, win share, and then correlate it to the value of a player to the sport. And I wondered if you had an observation on that.
Yeah, so one of the studies I did in my book is I downloaded a whole bunch of data from Facebook of how many fans every player has. And it's interesting. So I did a study of one of the things that's interesting about game of basketball is it has more than a lot of other sports. Soccer may be the same. There's an incentives problem, which is that what's good for the team isn't necessarily what's good for the player. Isaiah Thomas famously said, the secret of basketball is it's not about basketball. And it's kind of a mysterious quote. What does it mean the secret of basketball is not about basketball? And what he meant by this is that it's about getting the team to work together and that players get rewarded by scoring a lot of points, even if it doesn't help the team. And you see that in the data. If you try to predict what leads to players' salary or social media fandom, the overwhelming predictor is how many points they score. Everything else doesn't matter at all, basically. So if you take 1 million shots, you shoot 40% from the field, you never pass the ball, you get rewarded in fans, in salary, in endorsement deals, even if you're not helping the team. And maybe that's good for the game. Kobe Bryant is a legend and turned so many kids onto basketball. But Phil Jackson said you couldn't get Kobe to pass the ball in crunch time. In pressure moments, Kobe Bryant had a terrible field goal percentage because he realized, and nobody remembers that, he's still a legend because sometimes he'd make the shots. So that's one of the things that's very interesting about basketball is that there's this kind of disconnect between what's good for the individual and what's good for the team. That's true in a lot of areas of society, but not necessarily in baseball in the same way. So that'll be another thing to maybe explore more, kind of what builds a fan base. Now we have social media data, we have Twitter, we have Facebook. What kind of gets people excited about the game? It may be different than some of these players who might do boxing out. I don't think is really getting people excited about basketball the same way that hitting a big shot to win the game at the end is getting people excited.
It's the same thing in soccer a little bit. It's sort of one of the big innovations in 21st century soccer was for teams to focus much more on passing instead of shooting. Definitely don't shoot from outside the area, even though, of course, what fans like to see is the super dramatic goals from outside the area. And so you do have that same conflict. Of course, a lot of more microeconomic approaches, it's hard to assess these kind of general equilibrium effects that go beyond just success rates and things like that. Do we have any? I think we may have time for one more question. Otherwise, I think we're going to wrap up here. We're a little bit over time already, and so let's just wrap it up. Seth, thank you again for
Thanks so much for
coming. Thank you for talking. Great.